As we examine decision-making, and specifically strategic decision-making, we're going to spend a little bit of time of putting the term into context and evaluating these from an entrepreneurial perspective. We're going to begin by talking about some fundamental elements. We'll continue our discussion of Amazon and some of the elements that drove them into the categories that they began with. And we're also going to work to introduce this concept of cognition and connect cognition to the entrepreneurial process. So decisions, big and small, typically share a similar path. We recognize a problem. We generate alternatives. We evaluate those alternatives. And we select the alternative that best satisfies our evaluation criteria. And this is true for many different types of decisions, be they personal decisions, particularly big decisions of major purchases, professional decisions where we may be looking at career or job opportunities, or entrepreneurial decisions on what to launch and if to launch and how to launch our venture. As an example, if we think about what is the ideal product to sell online in 1996, the answer would be quite different than what it would be today. Now, in our current age, we have decades of information to pull from. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of articles and research and magazines and books and movies that are based on entrepreneurial success stories related to online businesses. But in 1996, there was little to none of that. There were some general business principles that made sense of thinking strategically about what can I sell online that has a large selection, that online presents a certain advantage, that makes it better than the traditional bricks and mortar retailer. There's a question of convenience. Is it something that I need immediately? It's unlikely that I'm going to order meals online if I'm hungry now. It's unlikely that I'm going to order furniture online if it's going to be inconvenient to wait and or expensive to pay the shipping cost. Low prices factors into that as well. There are different elements that happened in the early and mid-90s that made the internet a little bit different than it is now. Security is one of, I've never bought anything online before, is the average consumer. Am I willing to enter my credit card information online? Am I willing to buy things from companies I've never heard of before? And what's the consequence of that? Am I risking $10 or $20? Or am I risking hundreds or thousands of dollars with my online purchase? So when we look at that and we think about what's the ideal product, for Amazon, it was books and music, specifically CDs, that made sense. And we'll talk about why that made sense. One, competition. Books and music were a large and fragmented market. There were the mall retailers, small Walden Books, other music, Sam Goody's, things of that nature in the US that were available, but there were no major players. It was widely distributed. The other thing that made books and music make sense as a product is you knew exactly what you were getting when you ordered it online, sight unseen. It wasn't like clothing that you had to try on. It wasn't like a consumer electronic that you wanted to see the display and see what the quality of the picture of the television looked like. We knew that if a book was from a certain author of a certain title, or that we were buying a specific CD of a certain album from a certain artist, exactly what we could expect. And so that product definition made a lot of sense as an online purchase. Search was very easy to do as well. We did not have shoes that came in multiple sizes and multiple widths and multiple colors. We had a fairly simple process by which we could generate results and easily search and find what we were looking for in the way of books and music. We also had buying power. What that meant is that we had a lot of people that read and a lot of people that listened to music. We had brands where we were really looking for the authors that we liked and knew, or the musicians that we liked and knew. And so there was an element of brand that we were able to leverage and integrate as Amazon. Even though people did not know what Amazon was then, they knew the books that they loved and the music they loved. There was also a cost advantage of we by bypassing a lot of the bricks and mortar cost, a lot of the retail space cost, a lot of the labor cost, we could save a lot of money and pass those savings on to customers. So in 1996, these were elements that made sense for Amazon to start purely as a books and music online retailer. And with that, if you've studied Amazon, you know that it's taken many, many years for them to ever turn a profit, but they successfully are beginning to do that, and they built tremendous market share along the way that they have been able to successfully generate substantial revenues and eventually profits. But they didn't stop there. So the books and the music of the 96, 97, 98 was where they started. This chart I simply stopped in 2007 because I ran out of room. They've done infinitely more things since then, particularly in the digital space, as we've talked about before. But this gives you a good first-year landscape for the first 10 years. What did they do when? And what did they do by partnership and acquisitions as well? And so we'll talk about that too. That's another strategic thing to think about in how to grow as a startup, of who can you partner with and have alliances with, and in time perhaps acquire or merge with to grow your ability to act on entrepreneurial opportunities. So when we look at these strategic decisions, we want to think about them as having four fundamental characteristics. What really makes a concept or an opportunity or a decision strategic is that it's complex. There are lots of facts, variables. There's not an easy answer. There's uncertainty, and that we don't know the right outcome. Now, we can anticipate and plan and forecast, but we're not sure, so there is some element of uncertainty. There are elements of rationality to consider of what are our goals, what are our objectives, and the outcome of that decision. And there's also a consideration of control. And with that, we can control or hopefully at least influence some factors, albeit not all. So in that way, when we think about strategic decisions, all of these elements will come into play as well. Decision-making is also a cognitive process. And with that, that's where this element of thinking entrepreneurially begins to come into play. And for our purposes, we can think of cognitive and thinking as essentially synonyms, essentially the same thing, and that cognition involves individuals, the entrepreneurs in our case, thinking about what are my resources, what's a course of action that I'd like to pursue, what are the results that I'm aiming to realize, what do I do as things change, as things are dynamic, what do I do as I have different choices. And as entrepreneurs, we typically have choices. There are multiple alternatives at every stage. There is the element of perhaps not doing anything and waiting to see what happens, but there's some element of choice that is implied with decision making. It's also a strategic activity, and with that we can think about setting our revenue goals and our profit goals, thinking about market share and competitive advantage, considering product superiority and technical advantage, and all along the way our views on the decision, our views on our comfort level with risk, our views on what our alternatives are, as well as our personal tendencies for how we react or plan for these things, are going to guide our decision making in these many different factors that we face as entrepreneurs. So these strategic decisions involve critical analysis, some consideration of resources, some level of commitment, both personally and at the company level, and eventually with customers and investors as well in most cases. So I'd like to take a look at Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. What he introduced has been an incredible phenomenon. And it's easy to look at entrepreneurs after they have had success and hear them tell you how right they were and how they made all these great decisions and how they have had this wonderful success. It's a bit rare to be able to look at entrepreneurs that are successful, but then take a step back to the 15 or 20 years prior as they were just beginning to build their success, what their decision-making and thought processes were then, and what they expected to happen. And in that way, we have the benefit of understanding the future and knowing the future and see what happened as according to plan and see what was modified or adapted. So we'll take a few minutes on this video and look at and understand the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, based on a 1999 interview. In summary, strategic decision making is certainly something that we're familiar with, whether we've called it that or not, and that we do with some frequency, professionally and personally. It's something that we want to understand a bit more, and it's something that we can improve our effectiveness in. We also want to recognize that we can learn from others. We can learn from other entrepreneurs, we can learn from other successful companies and startups, and what they did for better and for worse in the creation and growth of their ventures. And that we want to recognize studying decision making is helpful to being better in our decisions and being better entrepreneurial decision makers.